Jonas, thank you so much for making the time to join us. Let's
Thank you.
start off with the global context before we get into Africa. What are we seeing in terms of the major trends that are informing the type of skills we're seeing in the world?
So we have a uneven global labor market recovery. Some regions are doing well, others are doing less well. So you can see how some countries are coming out of the recession, still trying to gain some traction in terms of employment improvement. But I would say on the whole, the difficulty is that we're tackling both cyclical trends as well as structural changes in the labor markets. And that's why for policymakers it's quite difficult to navigate. But we made some progress in 2014, and I think we will continue to see some progress also in 2015.
The African context, it is changing quite fast. We're seeing the emergence of new economic hubs in the east and the west of the continent. Are the skills trends changing at the same pace and in the same direction?
It's going to be very interesting for Africa because some of the structural changes that are occurring in labor markets, such as demographics, are a tremendous asset for the continent. So there are a great amount of young people entering into the workforce, so the talent pool should be very good. Now, at the same time, to be competitive, that same talent pool has to have globally competitive skills, because whether you know it or not, you are competing in a global context. So that's going to be both the opportunity and the challenge for the continent.
And of course, policymakers across the continent are also grappling with the long-term investment horizon they have to have in education, alongside with the short-term demands that the economy needs to grow. Any policy insights that you could give in that regard?
Education is going to be the key to building equality and access to opportunities through skills. You're absolutely right, and that is a long-term project. So in the short term, it is going to be very important that business, educational institution, and supported by government make efforts to bring young people into the world of work in a much more pragmatic approach and way. So apprenticeships, internships, any way that young people and entrants into the workforce can get exposed to labor market needs, and then also companies offering training inside their companies to bring the skills up so that they can compete within their local markets, within the continent, as well as, of course, globally.
Mr. Prising, but what about the unions in this equation? In particular, in South Africa, we're hearing a very strong call for a minimum youth wage, and to some extent that seems to be structurally keeping a lot of young people out of the labor market.
That is going to be one issue that needs to be thought about very, very carefully, because what we can see in other labor markets, when it is difficult for youth to come into the labor markets and become employed, you have a huge boom in youth unemployment. And that's what we're seeing in markets that are rigid, and whether they are unintended barriers to entry or not, they prevent young people from being hired by companies. If you look at the success story globally almost of youth unemployment, it is Germany. And Germany has what it calls, and what is colloquially called, mini jobs. And those mini jobs, they're paying less than half of what the minimum wage would be for any entry-level position. But it is a job that is a mix between studies as well as work experience. So they are not as productive as they would be in a full-time position. Employers are encouraged to bring them in, want to bring them in, because they're securing their future pipeline. So I would be very careful with establishing barriers for entry into the workforce and into companies that hire young people, because that could backfire very severely and actually push employers not to bring the young people in, which could be detrimental for the company as well as for the younger generations.
And just before I let you go, South Africa was in the headlines again last year for negative reasons, where we had a 5-month-long strike in the platinum industry. To what extent are strong unions that are able to paralyze the economy in that way becoming a very strong deterrent for investors who are looking to plow their funds?
Investors and companies in general want to have certainty that when they make those investments and when they operate in those markets, that they have stability and they can continue to grow their businesses. So any labor market disruption, any labor disputes that are occurring, of course, project negatively on the image of the country as well as on the ability to do business within that country. So, unions as well as employers working together, understanding what the long-term objective is of the organization is really vital. And that is an evolution that we have seen in many markets that have very strong union pressures as well as a good social dialogue so that the objectives are aligned long term and that both parties look ahead to see what's best for the employees as well as for the organizations, because those objectives can absolutely be aligned and should be aligned.
Final question, women in the broader equation, are we seeing the structural barriers that have kept women out of employment and also rising up the ranks to equal levels as men, are those being overcome?
We have seen some very good progress in terms of educational levels. So women in many cases in many parts of the world are now equally educated, and if not more educated in some parts of the world than what men are. But the female participation in the workforce still lags quite significantly. So men participate at 70%, women participate at 40%.
Mr. Prising, equal pay?
That is going to be something that, of course, has to happen. Equal skills, equal pay.